Hello everyone, welcome back to another Top 10 Commander video. Continuing what we're doing here, going color by color, this is a Redux series. End of 2020, we have brand new cards, and the list has changed from previous times. Mono red is considered one of, if not the weakest color by itself in Commander. You just lack a lot of precision to deal with problems. Tends to be more chaotic and all over the place. And as I said before with previous colors, expect to see newer cards on here. There's at least 5. Red got some pretty big upgrades like white did. But number 10, we have Jeska's Will. This is an interesting card because I don't think by itself it's that powerful. But when you consider the decks that are going to play it, anytime you can kind of get a free spell, not saying this is going to be free all the time, but if you get a red mana for each card in an opponent's hand, that's likely going to pay for itself at least, if not net you even more red mana, which we have other spells like Mana Geyser, all they just serve to do is get you nothing but red mana and allow you to go off in a turn. This also lets you exile the top 3 cards from your library so that you can play them until end of turn. So not only can it give you more mana, not only can it be kind of like another red ritual, but it's going to give you even more cards to play with. And something like this is easily going to be a staple in mono red. So number 9, we have Deflecting Swat. Now, as I said before, playing cards like these where it's free if you have your commander is ridiculous. And the red one is also really good. It's kind of underrated. I guess it's because it's sometimes the hardest one to use. Anytime you can change the target of a spell, it's not like you're countering or even copying a spell. You have to really know when to use it, because sometimes if you can change the target, that's not going to do much. So if you can change the target of a removal spell, a counter spell, again, a lot of these cards are just great because they're for free. You don't have to pay any mana if you have your commander out there. That's why it's not any higher. I think it's fantastic for red, but a lot of the value is, again, because it's more commander specific. And then number 8, we have Fiery Emancipation. This card is ridiculous because you just triple the damage that you deal to your opponents from all of your sources. So if you have a burn spell, if you have any kind of way to burn your opponents, this is instantly the best card on the field. Double damage is already pretty deadly if you triple it. I shouldn't have to tell you how quickly this is going to end games. And then number 7, we have a commander option, but let's be honest, it's just one of the better red creatures in general. Purphoros, God of the Forge. Also does really well with Fiery Emancipation. We're talking 6 damage, just having a creature enter the battlefield. The ability is incredibly simple. Just good red ETBs, dealing damage. If you have tokens, it benefits. If you have any kind of blanket benefits. Has been for a long time one of the ways that red can kind of even the playing field. You don't always have the power, you don't always have the strength, but if you can consistently burn your opponents, you can crawl back into any game. Number 6 is Chaos Warp. Now, as far as just removal goes, red is all over the place. You have some good burn removal. You have some more chaotic removal. Chaos Warp is technically in that category. However, it's more effective as removal for the best permanent on the field, because if you have to shuffle it back in and you give your opponent the opportunity to flip the top card of their library and then put it on the field if it's a permanent, it's still going to be worth it because you're getting rid of the best card, and if they have to shuffle it back into their deck, chances are they're not getting it back. I'm not going to say that it hasn't happened before in my play groups, but it's extremely rare. So Chaos Warp is still easily the best targeting removal spell in red. Number 5, we have a card from earlier this year, Underworld Breach. Now, I know it's nowhere near Yawgmoth's Will. You have to exile a bunch of cards in your graveyard for it to be close, but it's still the closest thing to Yawgmoth's Will in red, and for that it has to be up here pretty high. If you're playing a Spellslinger deck, it's useful because you likely have a bunch of cards in your graveyard. It's a little bit riskier because you have to keep exiling 3 more cards, but you are playing red, and red wouldn't be anything without the risks. Number 4, we have Dockside Extortionist. This is actually from last year, and it is probably the best newer red spell in the Commander format. It's in just about every red deck, and as I said before, certain cards, they don't even have to synergize with your strategy, they're just good by themselves, and Dockside Extortionist is pretty much red's Torment of Hailfire, Cyclonic Rift, Teferi's Protection. It's going to see play in just about every red deck because it is just that powerful. It enters the battlefield and you get a treasure token for each artifact and enchantment your opponents control. Late game, that's going to be a ton of treasure tokens, but the real reason why this is already one of the better red cards in Commander is because before this, you just have rituals. You have, for the most part, one-time uses that get you a bunch of mana, but now in red, we have a way where you can abuse an ETB and get even more treasure tokens, and just getting more mana is kind of like getting more card draw. The more resources that you have, the more you can do in your game. It's also a pretty simple creature like Purphoros, but it's such an abusable ETB. It makes it one of the most powerful in the game. And then we have number 3, Blasphemous Act. Now, as far as removal goes in red, Blasphemous Act is pretty much unmatched if you ask me. I think it belongs in just about every red deck. You have the shenanigans. You could have a card like Repercussion and win the game that way. Or you could have something like Vigor and get a bunch of +1/+1 counters on your creatures. But at the bare minimum, you're going to be paying very little mana to play Blasphemous Act, and you're dealing 13 damage to everything. That much value for 1 red mana is just insane. We have other burn removal board wipes, where you can pump a lot into X and deal a bunch of damage that way, but Blasphemous Act is just the most efficient. So number 2, we have Gamble. That's right, the one tutor that is really worth much of anything in red is Gamble. I know we have some equipment tutors in red, we have artifact tutors, but they're a lot more expensive and they're on creature ETBs and stuff like that. Gamble is just 1 red mana. It sees play in a ton of competitive decks because if you only pay 1 mana to get the card you need from your deck, you're going to keep your costs low, you're going to keep your turn going, so something like this is fantastic for that. The downside is that it is random, so you could end up discarding the card that you tutored up, but that's to be expected in red. Anything that's this good is going to have some kind of drawback, and if you ignore the drawback, it is very, very close to Vampiric Tutor. It's very close to that kind of good because you don't have to reveal the card that you searched up, unless of course that's a card that you discard. So before we go on to number 1, we have some honorable mentions here. We have the newer card, Wheel of Misfortune, which I really liked it, but I just kind of thought compared to what's coming up here, this would seem kind of redundant. It doesn't quite do enough. It's still a brilliant card if you want to play Chaos, if you want to draw more cards in red. I mean, look out for it because it was very close to making this list. We have Vandal Blast, which is a fantastic removal spell. In certain decks, this can be a win con if you have something like a Mycosynthellatus. And then we have another newer card, Leyline Tyrant. I think if we're just talking about mono red, this is a fantastic creature, and very similar to why we like Dockside Extortionist, any kind of assistance to red mana is just huge for the color. And then we have Kiki-Jiki, one of the craziest cards in the Commander format. Just a ton of fun that you can have with this Commander. And of course you have the combos and other Commander decks. Has been one of my favorite red creatures for a long time now. So number 1 is Wheel of Fortune, and no doubt about it, everyone discards their hands and they draw a new 7. This has always been very good value. You just pay 3 mana, and it's also quite chaotic too. I think people have kind of forgotten the chaotic element to this kind of card. That's how often it's played. I think people tend to stay away from the more chaotic cards if they want to optimize their decks. But Wheel of Fortune is like that one exception. It's one of those crazy cards that if you can play it, it's on the reserve list by the way, so it's pretty expensive now. If you can play it, it's going to make your deck better in red. You're going to have that kind of card draw that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get. There are other cards that are similar to Wheel of Fortune, but they don't do exactly this for the cost. So for that, it's still the best red card in Commander. I just think over time, it's going to synergize with the most. Compared to every other red card on this list, I think this is always going to be useful. Again, this doesn't have to synergize with anything in your deck, and it's still going to be one of the better cards in your whole deck. So anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this list. Let me know what you think about the top 10 mono red cards in the Commander format. Again, I like playing mono red. It's always a challenge. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, depending on your play group, but it's pretty much always going to be fun. Anyway, you all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next time.